They packed my things into the back of my car on Christmas Eve and told me to leave because my brother was coming home. My father shut the front door in my face. My mother stood on the porch and said, plain as a grocery list, "You'll make us choose." That's who did it. My parents. And that's what they did. They chose him, gave him the house, and left me on the street with a duffel bag, a car I couldn't afford to insure properly, and the sound of their voices telling me I had no right to stay in the home I'd grown up in. It hurt because I had been the steady one. It hurt because the timing was brutal and deliberate. Christmas is a date you can't forget. I don't say any of this for drama. I say it because the beginning of everything is always simple and obvious. They asked me to go, and I left. Yeah, there's a ledger in my head that lists the weight of ordinary things. On one side, the months I'd cooked for Mom after her knee surgery, the tax forms I filed for them one winter when Dad couldn't get out of bed, the checks I'd written when their car broke down. On the other side, the day they told me to leave. The two didn't line up. At the time, I was 28. I had finished grad school a year earlier and was living at their house to save money while I looked for work. I thought it was temporary. My student loans were around $45,000. My credit score was still recovering from the graduate program's short-term credit card avalanche. I worked evenings at a small accounting firm, 60 hours a week through tax season, and 75 when clients needed it. My living expenses were minimal because I paid utilities and groceries in exchange for a room and the quieter house to study and sleep. I had signed up for insurance through work, but the deductible was steep. I drove an old Honda with a rust line on the passenger door. I could not just pick a city and move. I owed money, I had no security deposit, and I had spent months trying to keep my parents afloat while they argued about health insurance networks and the rising cost of Dad's prescriptions. My brother Jeremy, the golden child, had been away for 6 years. He left for Florida with 2 suitcases and a guitar. He came back with a new girlfriend, a new haircut, and the kind of swagger people mistake for stability. He called once a year, sent a postcard for my birthday maybe twice, and otherwise existed in family stories. When he showed up on their doorstep the late November before that Christmas, they changed. I can still picture the way my mother's face smoothed when she saw him. She left the sink full of dishes and crossed the yard like someone walking toward a light. My father started telling stories about better times in a way I hadn't heard since I was a kid. I thought maybe that was normal. Parents are allowed to be proud of one child, but pride should not become erasure. They started to build pressure in small ways. The first time I remember feeling excluded was when my mother called me to say that she and Dad were going shopping for Christmas gifts with Jeremy alone. "We want to make it special," she said. She didn't ask if I wanted to come. The second was when emails went unanswered to my address, but were read in the kitchen as if to spite me. Then came the financial tightening. Dad stopped contributing to our joint grocery account and handed me a single envelope for the month, which was noticeably smaller than before. When I asked, he shrugged and said, "You can manage. You've always managed." I tried to be practical. I rationed the gas. I took double shifts. I left early in the morning to file returns during lunch breaks. I paid my portion of the property taxes that spring because we'd agreed to split them while I lived there. I signed a liability waiver for my mother's volunteer driving because the insurance company insisted on proof of secondary driver status. I made a spreadsheet with dates and dollar amounts, groceries, medication co-pays, ask the checks I wrote to the lawn service. I believed that facts mattered. Facts did not matter to them once the decision was made. The first escalation was small and cruel. They changed the locks while I was at work. My key no longer fit. I called and Mum said she'd trouble remembering giving my key to Jeremy for safekeeping. When I showed up at the locksmith's office, they told me the locks had been replaced that morning. I stood there with my duffel bag on a folding chair in the parking lot while people came and went. Someone I didn't recognize passed me a sandwich and said, "You okay?" I said, "No." And then I got back into my car and drove to the hospital parking lot because it was warm and quiet. I slept in my car for 2 nights. On the 3rd day, I found a cheap room in a house share 3 blocks from downtown. Rent was $500 a month with utilities, which I scraped together by cashing in a microloan and eating only what I cooked from ramen noodles and bulk beans. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that when winter ended, things would be different. I answered my parents' calls with clipped calm because I wanted to believe the conversation could still be negotiated. They added insult to injury by making the logistics of contact awkward. Mum would call after 9 p.m. when I was asleep, or leave a message in which she blamed me for choosing to be difficult. Dad didn't call at all unless Jeremy was present, and then he would speak in a voice I recognized from my childhood. Short, proud, like a man reciting a script. The first time the family money became a weapon they used was when my name came up in a conversation with the bank. I'd co-signed for the refinance of my mother's car 3 years before. I didn't think about it. When Jeremy returned, he handled the bank calls and arranged for Mum and Dad to refinance the house under his name through a temporary power of attorney. When I asked for paperwork, they told me I didn't need to see it. When I insisted, they said it was just a formality. I believed the formality. Belief is expensive. By the next spring, my name was dusted out of documents. Jeremy applied for a reverse mortgage and then consolidated other debts under the house. He paid off his own lingering loans and took out enough to start a landscaping business he would later claim was failing. My parents' savings evaporated in 12 months. They told me they had done what was necessary to keep the home because they were protecting the family. When I tried to reason with them, Mum said, "We had to think about the future." She said it like the future was a specific person who needed guarding. Every escalation was the same pattern, a small, specific betrayal followed by a larger one. I would react with paperwork or a pointed question, and their response would shrink my options. When I complained to a cousin about the power of attorney, the cousin told me it would be hard to undo. I called the lawyer who first helped draft documents years earlier. He said it would be expensive and the law favored whoever controlled the paperwork. The consequence was immediate. I had fewer leverage points. If I had standing, I could challenge them. I didn't. Jeremy's methods were cunning because they were ordinary. He arranged for my mail to be rerouted to the house and then refused to let me come inside to collect it. He started paying my father's phone bill because he couldn't handle the nagging otherwise. And then he would answer in the house's name when the post office called about unpaid fines. He told white lies that, spread thinly, looked like truth. He told our neighbors that I had left to find myself and that I wanted no part of family affairs. People believed that version when it was easier than dealing with the alternative. I reacted the best I could. Tax forms, letters, meetings with attorneys I couldn't afford. I took on more work. I moved rooms twice in 2 years because landlords don't take kindly to late payments. I lost 2 clients when I couldn't guarantee my availability. My reaction turned into consequence, a steady attrition of my stability. Each time something new broke, I fixed it the way you fix a leaky faucet, until one day your hands are raw and nothing holds. There were moments where the pressure became public humiliation. At a small family reunion in the summer, a year after they kicked me out, Jeremy stood and announced that he had bought new windows for the house and thanked my parents for their wisdom in handing him responsibility. He made a joke about my adventurous phase, and the room laughed. My name was background noise in my own family. I left early and sat in the park until the sun set. A neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years rolled down her window and called out, "If you need anything, honey." I wanted to say yes and mean it, but I couldn't. Asking for help had become an admission of defeat. Sometimes betrayal took the form of practical exclusion. When medical decisions came up, they started excluding me. Mum's knee surgery was scheduled by Jeremy with a surgeon who accepted a new payment plan. He refused to discuss the plan with me, even though I had driven Mom to multiple pre-op visits and sat with her while she signed consent forms. I had helped fold her pillow into a comfortable shape and learned which medications left her groggy. The day they wheeled her into surgery, I stood in the hospital corridor and watched the doors close. I waited in the wrong waiting room because Jeremy had each receptionist note that I was not part of the immediate family team. It felt like an announcement. You are not invited to witness this life. By year 3, after the Christmas expulsion, their financial situation had deteriorated. Jeremy had burned through the initial reverse mortgage money on renovations and a landscaping van that turned out to be a lemon. He'd defaulted on several small business loans. The house's new improvements were cheap veneer and badly installed tile. The bank began to call. Mom and Dad started showing up at my low-rise apartment because they were embarrassed to be seen walking around our old street with strangers who asked the obvious questions. I let them in because I was, for reasons I can't fully explain, still their daughter. I cooked. I said nothing when they sat in my couch and picked at the throw cushions that had belonged to the house I could no longer enter. Each time they came, it was an escalation in reverse. At first, they came with cake and stories, later with bills and worry. They would sit and sometimes cry, and then in the next breath, they would say something like, "We did what we had to," as if it could be a shield against guilt. I began to see the cost of their choice in their bodies. Dad's shoulders slumped more, Mom's hair thinned. They wore the idea of stability like a coat that didn't fit. I kept a ledger of these visits too, because facts were mine and facts were how I kept from disintegrating. One late afternoon, I found an envelope in Dad's wallet while he dozed off on my couch. It had a list of names and amounts. Jeremy's name was circled, and there were notes in Dad's careful hand. Loaned for van, paid by Mom, signatures okay. I didn't say anything then. I'd learned that confrontation in the moment only moved the chess pieces, not the board. The low point came 2 winters after the eviction. It was the night I sat alone in my small kitchen and realized I had no leverage left. My phone had died and I had no money to replace it. One envelope left for electricity that month. If we paid it, I could keep the heat on. If I didn't, the landlord would switch it off and I would sit in a cold box. My breathing felt loud in the small room. I had carried the sound of my parents' chews in my chest for 2 years, and it had calcified into a constant ache. I had lost clients, missed birthdays, and let opportunities pass because the energy it took to be angry with them drained me. I had lost the house. I had lost the routine of being part of their days. I had lost the easy assumption that family lines are drawn on paper. That night, a neighbour knocked on my door with a casserole. What, she had heard that the landlord planned to raise rent and wanted to help. I told her I could manage. I lied. After she left, I ate from the casserole with a fork and thought about names on that list in Dad's wallet. I thought about whether any of them had ever really wanted to be my family, or whether they had been hungry for whatever power Jeremy could offer them. I thought about how easily everyday decency had been sacrificed. The turning point came later that winter. Completely mundane and unseen. I had been working late at the accounting firm and had a day off between filing deadlines. I went to the post office to change an address for a client, and on a small cabinet behind the counter, there was a stack of property transfer records that someone had misfiled and set aside. They were in a manila folder with last year's date. I asked the clerk a casual question, and she said some documents were misrouted. I paged through them while she went to find the supervisor. Among the envelopes was a copy of a deed with our family name on it and a handwritten note. Do not record until authorized. It was a dated note signed by my father and dated the summer before Jeremy came home. I didn't understand the significance at first. The deed was a transfer of a small parcel of land adjacent to the house that, in our town, had been overlooked during the original mortgage. The notation suggested a conditional transfer, something meant to be recorded only if certain conditions were met. When I pressed the clerk for more information, she apologized, said she shouldn't be showing it to me, and asked if I was planning to follow up. I left with a photocopy because my hands were shaking, and better to have paper than to have nothing. That paper was the pivot. It was not a dramatic confession. It wasn't a perfect cinematic reveal. It was paper, a thing with edges. When I took it to the attorney I could afford, the one I had used for a small estate sale years earlier, he frowned and said I had cause to investigate. He told me the note implied there had been an agreement, transfer contingent upon some condition that, if violated, could be grounds to rescind subsequent actions. He said the bank's paperwork might have skipped a step in the refinance, that the reverse mortgage might not have been properly recorded against every parcel. The kind of clerical oversight that lawyers call a technicality can be the hinge on which a larger door opens. It was a mistake, a small misfiled envelope, a note that shouldn't have been where it was. Mistakes are unspectacular. I liked that. I wanted unspectacular truth. I subpoenaed records, which took months. I travelled to the county clerk's office, read through microfilm, and paid copy fees. I found other irregularities, signatures that didn't quite match, a notary stamp that looked imprecise. More importantly, I found a line of emails between Jeremy and a loan broker that referenced the conditional transfer and suggested bypassing certain requirements. In one line, captured in black and white, Jeremy wrote, "We'll take care of things on our end. Don't worry about the formal approval." That's not a crime on its face, but paired with the misfiled documents, it was a lever. Once you have a document, the power dynamic changes slightly. It doesn't fix everything, but it gives you options you didn't have before. I filed a civil suit for declaratory judgment and rescission of certain mortgage documents. I did not do it because of vengeance. I did it because there was a pattern of misfeasance, and because those patterns had a cash consequence that had been borne disproportionately by me and by my parents. The legal process takes a long time. It is granular and boring in a way that's almost merciful. You meet in conference rooms, you exchange spreadsheets, you hand over tax returns, you sit in hearing rooms while a judge says things like, "Counsel, please approach." You grow accustomed to the small rituals. The consequence of those documents over the span of 2 years was not immediate riches, it was leverage, and it opened negotiations with the bank and with Jeremy that hadn't existed before. The bank didn't want a protracted litigation because foreclosures and rescission can be messy and public. Jeremy, confronted with the possibility that his documentation might not hold, made mistakes. He tried to move money quickly and left a trail. A loan broker he'd used gave a statement that contradicted his earlier emails. Emails that had been carefully deleted were archived on a backup server and recovered. The discovery process revealed more than I wanted and less than I had hoped for. It revealed enough. I don't want to give the impression that the legal victory was glorious or cinematic. We negotiated, we settled. The bank agreed to restructure certain loans and to remove the reverse mortgage claim on the parcel in question. Jeremy signed a settlement that required him to make restitution to my parents, to pay a portion of the outstanding debts, and to vacate certain accounts. It was not a jail sentence. He did not lose everything. He accepted a payment plan and an agreement that limited his ability to borrow against the house again without both parental signatures. It was an adult resolution, paper and ink and signatures. The judge signed an order and the clerk stamped the pages. The world moved forward. Meanwhile, I kept working. I took the small settlement the law firm awarded me for attorney's fees and for a portion of the damages, and I used it as seed money. I took a job in corporate accounting with a good salary and a decent benefits package. The kind of job I'd once thought out of reach because I'd been scraping for years. I worked there for 6 years, saved aggressively, invested in an index fund, bought 2 small rental properties in neighborhoods that had been undervalued. I learned about honest risk, inspections, tenant background checks, municipal zoning. I reinvested my profits, refined my contracts, hired a property manager so I could sleep at night. There were setbacks, a tenant who trashed a unit, a roof that needed replacement. But the work was steady and the returns compounded. It was not a fairy tale. It was a series of deliberate, often boring decisions made without drama. I met someone along the way, someone practical who liked spreadsheets and knew how to read a plumbing estimate. We married in a small ceremony in the backyard of a house we could afford without drama. We bought a modest 3-bedroom home with acreage enough for a garden and a small studio where I kept files and receipts and the manila folder that started everything. Over 12 years, what was a modest portfolio became a small real estate business and then a company with 12 employees managing 20 rental units. The business had a name, an LLC, separate bank accounts, a relationship with a local bank that respected paperwork. We bought a small commercial building in a part of the city that people were just beginning to notice. We developed it carefully, rented to a coffee shop and a law office, and collected rent on time. We were careful and incremental. When people ask how I ended up with a $10 million house, they imagine a single lucky sale or a sudden windfall. That's not accurate. A $10 million property in our area is a large house on a large lot in a neighborhood that gained value as the city grew. We bought the mansion as the end product of a long-term plan to move into a place that would accommodate family if family ever needed us, to have space for guests, and an office where I could host clients. We did not buy it to punish anyone. We bought it because it made sense for our stage in life and because we could afford it without relying on exploitative loans or corporate favors. There is dignity in that, even if it's not dramatic. Years after the settlement, my parents showed up at our front gate. The car they arrived in had an expired tag. Mum's coat was too thin for the January air. Dad's hands shook when he got out. They asked if they could come in. They were quieter than I had expected. They said they were sorry. They said that Jeremy had made promises he couldn't keep, that he had used their name to borrow more than they understood, that contractors had taken deposits and disappeared. They had been evicted by the bank in a way that had been polite but final. They spoke as if this was a thing that had happened to them rather than something they had helped arrange. I listened. I had a ledger for all of it. I had the photocopy of the manila folder and the emails and a memory of nights spent in the backseat of my car with the heater on. I had spent years learning how to convert pain into something that keeps you breathing. Careful work, patience, contracts. And the power dynamic had shifted. They had come to my property and asked, not demanded. They sat in a living room that had art on the walls and heat that worked without thought and looked like people who had been surprised to find themselves somewhere else. I won't pretend I felt nothing. I felt a slow, layered relief and a cold place where trust used to be. I felt anger too, but it sat beside the relief like a neighbor. I could have cut them off. I could have refused to open the door. I could have put the agreement we had negotiated with Jeremy in a drawer and pretended the whole family thing didn't exist. But my life is not built on theatrical retribution. I am not a movie character. I am a woman with a ledger and a life and a small, stubborn impulse toward practicality. The consequences were practical and quiet. We took them in. We set terms. My husband and I wrote a short agreement for their stay. They could live in a guest cottage on the property for a fixed period while they stabilized, but we required them to participate in financial counseling and to sign onto a plan to get their bills in order. No lawyers, no public humiliation. We involved a social worker who could navigate the county's assistance programs and a financial counselor who helped them budget. We did not prop up Jeremy. When he showed up later asking for money, we gave him a resource list and told him to start with the bank, as he had legal obligations to fulfill. That's an important detail. Consequences are not punitive if they are reasonable. They are what happens when boundaries are finally enforced. This did not fix everything. There were awkward dinners. There were long silences during which the past felt like an uninvited guest. There were things they said that cut me. Defensiveness thinly veiled as ignorance. Mom would sometimes apologize and then immediately minimize. Dad would try to explain away his choices with a rote mention of protecting Jeremy. Old habits persist. Golden children change only if they accept the fact that they need to. Jeremy did some things to try to regain favor, calls, offers to help with small repairs, but he didn't do the hard work of restitution until the legal papers forced him to. When he asked to come to Thanksgiving, we said no. The payoff, if I can call it that, was different than I had imagined when I sat in my car those nights. It wasn't a single phone call where everyone cried and hugged. It was a slow rearrangement of the household. It was my mother learning to use a budget app and then emailing me a grocery list that fit it. It was my father learning to accept a small, steady income from a part-time job at a hardware store. It was the moment they both stood in my kitchen and understood the concept of marginal cost and why you should not trust anyone who says, "Just trust me," about money. It was them, finally, sitting in a counsellor's office and hearing the same things I had been saying for years, but from an expert, which made the words real for them. That is a small victory, but an earned one. There was also a social cost. Friends asked questions. Some family members watched and judged. Others reached out with offers of help without asking for anything in return. I lost a cousin who took Jeremy's side publicly, and we stopped speaking because our values were misaligned. That cost a holiday and a handful of conversations. I gained a steadier sense of who mattered, not the number of people who attended a party, but who showed up when the roof leaked. In the quiet weeks following their move onto the property, I walked the lines between being a daughter and being a steward of my life. I made them help with chores. I met with the social worker and arranged for automatic bill payments to be set up so that no one could misdirect a utility payment again. I sat with my mother while she learned to use the dishwasher and with my father while he read aloud the instructions for the new phone. There were small kindnesses and small corrections. There was no redemption narrative. Redemption is messy and often incomplete. Instead, there was a pragmatic rearrangement, boundaries, support, a slow rebuilding of trust. People sometimes ask whether I forgave them. Forgiveness is not a single moment. I live with the memory of that Christmas and the cold taste of being abandoned in a parking lot. I carry the ledger, but I also carry the fact that my parents are old and brittle in ways that make me tired, and that living with the intense feeling of righteous anger forever would be a poor return on the life I'd built. I chose to protect my life and to set conditions for their return. That is not forgiveness, and it is not cruelty. It is a decision grounded in numbers and in the soft arithmetic of everyday care. The mansion is not a monument to revenge. It is a place where I can host the people I want to host, and where quiet things, like the hum of the furnace and the sense of safety at night, prevail. My life now includes partners who are dependable, employees who are paid on time, and a rhythm that makes space for work and rest. People who come to the house are treated with courtesy. Those who betrayed me are offered a path back that respects boundaries. I have learned that power looks a lot like a series of small choices made consistently. Save, invest, read the fine print, keep copies of documents, and when you have leverage, use it to make sensible repairs rather than to humiliate. When my parents sit at our kitchen table, sometimes they apologize and leave it at that. Sometimes they tell stories about earlier times, when the roof leaked and we fixed it as a team, when Dad taught me how to change a tire. Those memories are not erased. Memory is complicated. It contains both kindness and cruelty. I have made peace with the fact that my family is a mix. I have also made peace with the fact that I am not obligated to let the mix smother me. If there is a single clear thought I have after all of it, it is this: People are complicated and documents matter. A misfiled envelope can start the unraveling, and a careful ledger can be the thing that pulls you through. The years were long, and at times they were small and messy. The ending is not cinematic. They are here, I am here, and we are figuring out how to be people in the same geography again without repeating old patterns. If you liked hearing my story, please leave a like. If you want to hear more, subscribe. And if you've ever had a family situation that surprised you, tell me in the comments. I read them.